This is Mark Dunn, and you're listening to the Nothing Shocking podcast.
Want to know what's going on in the world of music? Then tune in to the Nothing Shocking podcast, a non-genre based, all ages friendly rock and roll program. Join us weekly for interviews with all your favorite rock stars from the mainstream to the underground. You can find us at nothingshocking.libsyn.com or anywhere you download podcasts.
We're putting the band back together.
The numbers all go to 11.
I'm talking about bands that rock. Led Zeppelin. What about Sabbath? AC/DC. Motorhead.
Does that mean it's louder? Is it any louder?
Well, it's one louder, isn't it?
We're not worthy! We're not worthy!
Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
I get up off the ground and raise my head. Days like this, think I should be dead. One for Satan, two for me. Let's cheat the devil, it's fun, don't you agree?
Welcome to the Nothing Shocking podcast. I'm your co-host, Jeff Untied, and with me in Dog Bowl Studios is
Coach Nez.
You can find the Nothing Shocking podcast on Libsyn or any podcatchers. Like our Facebook page or follow us on Twitter at NoShockPod.
You can also find the Nothing Shocking podcast on Rock Rage Radio every Sunday morning at 7 a.m. Central Time. Our sponsor is Ragged Records, located in downtown Rock Island, Illinois, and downtown Davenport, Iowa. We'd like to thank the Hong Kong Sleepover for allowing us to use their music for our intro and bumper ending.
We're proud to announce that Ragged Records and Trash Can Annie will be combining with Alternating Currents for a live music featuring the Dendrons from Chicago, Illinois, and Running Man from the Quad Cities on Saturday, August 19th. They're having a Sidewalk sale with $2 LPs, CDs on sale, vintage clothing from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. From 6 to 8 p.m. is the show with the bands.
Yeah, and that performance is going to be at Ragged Records itself, correct?
Yes, at the downtown Davenport location.
Yeah, tonight's guest is
Mark Dunn.
Yeah, Mark Dunn is promoting his new album that was released in March, Top Gear. Right now, he's also collaborating with Dave Coutts of talk show fame.
Yeah.
They're collaborating on some new music. So, great interview. Let's get to it.
All right, got us excited. Good night.
Good night. Mark, welcome to the Nothing Shocking podcast. I'd like to introduce you my co-host, Jeff Untied.
Mark, thanks for joining us tonight.
Hey, what's up, guys? How are you?
Fantastic. So let's go back to the story here. I think it was back in April. I get a text message from Dave Coutts saying, would you be interested in interviewing Mark Dunn? And I said, well, if you're cool with him, we're cool with him. So you got a lot of exciting news about Dave Coutts, so let's get right into it. You are currently collaborating with him with some new material. Can you give our listeners an insight on the progress of this new venture?
Well, the idea that I'm even working with Dave is surreal still, on his face. But Dave sneezes and 3 songs come out, So, And he's just super prolific, and some of these ideas have been on his front porch for a while. He just hasn't swept them off yet. So, it's a lot of fun developing these songs. Dave and I usually are on FaceTime a couple of nights each week at least, and we're 3 hours difference because I'm East Coast and he's West Coast, and we're just fashioning these. Like, he's got this idea, and he shows it to me, and I expand upon it, and I lay down a rough, and I send that to him. He lays down his vocal rough, and I've got my drummer from the record Top Gear, Trip Johnson's involved with this, as well as the producer for that record, 3-time Grammy Award-winning Andrew Coleman. And everybody loves Dave's voice. Yeah. Everybody loves his voice. But, it's, and I'll just give you guys some background. I love that record from 1997. I went to see Talk Show open for Foo Fighters in Norfolk, Virginia, where I grew up. And my friend Mike Doyle and I, another great guitar player, didn't even stay for Foo Fighters. No disrespect to Dave, they just weren't my bag at the time. But I had a mutual friend that knew the DeLeo brothers out in LA, so I just wanted to try and angle because I'm always networking, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I had a gig that night in town. And, I was a kid, and so anyhow, I wound up meeting Robert, and then Dave comes around, and he was very pleasant, just a super sweet guy. I just was like, dude, your voice is so unique, and yada, yada, yada. And, and then life happens. So this came around organically on the internet last October, but a Dave Coutts music post that I must have followed his music page whenever, I can't remember. Popped up. I just chimed in about how I met him back on that tour. I consider that album to be a hidden gem of the 90s, and just that kind of stuff. And so I get these inboxes later on in my Facebook that are 3 different messages, and they wound up being from Dave. And I was just floored, like he kind of internet stalked me in my playing, which was flattering, And so, we just started chatting, and he's like, I told him up front, I said, Dave, I am going to fanboy you like you don't even know, because you know what I'm saying? And my drummer Trip, that I play with, he's my guy. So I didn't tell him immediately. We're setting up for a show, and I leaned over to him, and I'm like, guess who I've been talking to? And guess who's looking like he might want to do a couple of tunes. He goes, who? And when I said Dave Coutts, Trip doesn't get excited about anything. He lit up. So that's kind of the genesis of this relationship. More importantly, Dave and I, in less than a year, I consider him to be one of my best friends. We literally chat every day.
So cool.
So it is. It's like the hang has to be real for, I'm not saying there can't be tension. Look at Van Halen, right? But if the hang is real, that's going to exude in the music,
Absolutely.
Yeah, so,
yeah, I know this is kind of premature, but you've worked with many artists of many different genres, and how does Dave and yourself view this musical journey that you guys are on? Is this kind of just like a one-off project, do you feel, or do you feel like there could be more material down the road, or how's it going to work out, do you think?
Well, again, when Dave hits allergy season, he's going to sneeze an album in a week. So, I just think that, since this is what I do, I think that the prolific level of songwriting that Dave has, and I'm not being hyperbolic. Dude really has amazing ideas. Side note, I didn't know that he had written "Wash Me Down." And so, because that's because Dave and I are both chord snobs, and so are the DeLeo brothers. They're wonderful musicians, and when Dave told me he wrote that, I'm like, dude, that's like, music. He's like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm like, it sounds good, it is good. So not to belabor that question, but I've got a lifelong friend out of this relationship. So that's, at this point, more important to me than anything, but I don't see how we don't continue to make music. How about that?
Fair enough.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about your guitar and your influences. Where'd you come from?
I was born in Keflavik, Iceland.
Nice.
And I'm the youngest of Navy family. I was big oops, and I'm at the bottom of the stack. I'm the youngest of 5 boys. And so, my oldest brother was an adult when I was born. That's how far spaced out we are. So, there was just guitars lying around the house. It never was really a thing for me. And when I say that, I don't mean in the sense that it wasn't like, go practice your piano, which, I would have loved to have been able to do. But this guitar just was lying around the house. And, I think about 6 or 7 years old, I started picking up, 3-chord Elvis songs and Beatles songs. And I'm sure I played a lot of shit wrong, but I was just getting at it, And you do. The bliss of ignorance is how people learn things, on their own. My brothers, would show me a couple of things, but My first concert was the Bee Gees, which was an unreal experience. I was 9 years old, and it was on that tour, so I don't know how old you guys are, but it was when they were at the biggest. They did 33 shows in the U.S. that summer. It was September 26, 1979, the Norfolk Scope. I remember everything about it like it was last week. And that really enthralled me to the entertainment aspect of it. But what really got me into the guitar was a couple of years later. I was already playing guitar, but, I was a song kid. Like, I was playing tunes and strumming. And then I saw a live Van Halen video, and I was like, wait a minute. There's actually, I didn't understand that somebody could, be better at an instrument. You know what I mean? Like, you either played it or you did not. You either play football or you do not play football, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And when I saw the live video, I had heard Van Halen before. Because I'm the youngest kid, and one of my brothers is a DJ and all that shit. But when I saw the live video, I went, that looks like a really good job. And that's when I started doing the deep dive into learning how to play guitar, And I was 25 hours a day, 8 days a week on Van Halen. Like, I learned everything. And, that doesn't necessarily, as a younger guy, that didn't necessarily convey well with other styles. So that my next epiphany along the way was to start learning other things.
Yeah.
So, and music is so weird, man. I moved to Atlanta. Well, before that, I started doing fly dates for the Windborne music of Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd with the symphonies. And Randy Jackson from Zebra. And so I moved to a bigger market down in Atlanta and started, I got invited to work with some country artists. And I took that on a personal dare. But back when I did that, I got the gig, first of all. Let me just go ahead and clarify that. But, back then, like in the 2000s, if 38 Special would have been a band in the 2000s, they would have been on country radio.
Exactly.
Band, you know what I mean? Like, so it was still, very rock-ish with, putting some twang and stuff. So that's where I really started to cut my teeth. And then, played a lot of shows, obviously. And then started really just kind of coming into my own. It's one of those things. I don't think I have. I mean, some people say they can tell it's me when I'm playing, which is either a huge flattery or a huge diss. I'm not sure, but yeah, right. But I've like now my favorite guitar player is Eric Johnson, and the first time I saw him, I was a bass technician for the opening band just so I could get close to him when I was 19 years old and see what in the actual hell was going on. Because he sounded like he was doing stuff that I didn't hear Eddie Van Halen do. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So that was the first of many times I've seen an EJ, and I love how he has an amalgamation of all of the things that he's listened to. Now, when you listen to him play, they're direct references: Wes Montgomery, Clapton, Jeff Beck, but they're still his. And I think it's been the last 10 years where I've been trying to find my thing. Yeah. That's an amalgamation of everything I've been exposed to, from funk to the Bee Gees, obviously, to Elvis, to, country, Alan Jackson, Brent Mason's a guitar player, and, fusion, listening to Mahavishnu, which is an acquired taste. I don't care what anybody says. That's heavy, So that's kind of been my journey, and at this point, I'm still just like I go from. You guys have. I'm assuming you've listened to the album Top Gear.
Yes.
So I could see how you might do the Scooby-Doo head tilt listening to that record and saying, this dude's playing with Dave. You know what I mean? So, but that's not that. I mean, I'm a session guy, so I'm playing on all sorts of records every week. You know what I mean? And playing with Dave, if the music's good, the music's good. I don't care, but I do care that I'm working with Dave, and he's just writing pop rock songs that are just dumb good, just stupid good. Makes me laugh.
Well, I wanted to bring this to the release of the Top Gear album this past March. Can you talk a little bit more about the creative process to get this album out there?
Yeah, thank you for asking.
Yeah.
We could kind of just stipulate the creative process for that record. While it began in my teens with a couple of those riffs, they've lasted that long. It was really COVID, when COVID hit. This is kind of shameful to admit, but I had never really done any home recording. I was either doing sessions or somebody else's place to do the demo or whatever. I had studios and I was always on the go. So it's kind of shameful to admit when you consider that I play music for a living. So COVID hit and I just broke down and I started learning how to do, the home recording software. And I probably invented an entirely new lexicon of profanity as I learned how to do it because, it's just different, and I started demoing songs. And so those demos led to developing them into the album that is now Top Gear.
Very good. Drop D for E is my favorite track on Top Gear, and it's your tribute to Eddie Van Halen. Can you talk a little bit more about just the whole writing and recording process of that track?
Yeah, that song, I wrote that riff when I was 19. And it was, I think the two best drop D riffs, you guys know what that means for guitar. It's like you've taken the low E string and you drop it down a whole step and it gives it more of a guttural tone. And so I love Unchained and I love Lay It Down by Rat. Those are the two, in my opinion, best drop D riffs of the 80s period in the story. The tone on both of them, the angst, the way they're mixed, the badassery of how they're played, they're just unparalleled. So that's what inspired me. And, actually that song that I had that riff and I had a rock band with, we had a developmental deal back in the late 80s, early 90s. And we recorded that with that riff, not the same arrangement or anything or the chord structure, but it was a vocal tune. And so I've had the riff forever. And I decided to start with that. That was actually the first song I demoed. But to your point about it being a tribute to Eddie, we were mid recording when I said, you know what, this should be a tribute to Eddie, because the working title for it was "Say You Will," and we had these monster guitar tracks. I'd already tracked like 3 different tracks of double guitars. It just sounded like this wall of Mack truck guitar driving down the street, and I'm like, let's make this a tribute to Eddie. So my producer was Andrew Coleman that I was telling you about. He's a big Van Halen fan too, and he's recorded everyone. He's worked with Justin Timberlake. He's recorded a record for Madonna, Pharrell Williams. He's whether you like Happy or Not and Blurred Lines. Yeah, Andrew recorded that stuff. So we pull Unchained into Pro Tools, and we just sit there and go back and forth, and we just I've got a 100-watt hand-wired Marshall on 10 because that's what you got to do. And I had I'm kind of getting guitar geeky now, so forgive me, but I had a PV Wolfgang that I just think the one I have is a special. It's got the pickups in it and the vibe on it. People like ask me to sell them that guitar, and that ain't gonna happen. Anyway, I used that, and I think we got about 75% Unchained sound, 25% Lay It Down, and I think every time that riff comes on, I'm like, man, I can't believe that's me. Because I can't. I mean, I'm trying to be objective in my own brain, and I go, that's just a bitchin' riff. And I want to tell you that I've done a couple of these interviews, and all the interview people say that is their favorite tune. So I must have struck a chord. Pun intended.
It's contagious.
Well, I like the opener round with the harmony vocals. Can you talk a little bit about that, the making of that track?
Yes, So when that's another riff I had back in the 90s, just the very Aerosmith influenced part, if you will, even though I didn't realize it until after I'd written. I'm like, I wonder if I can even get away with this, but it's not the same thing. But and when I started thinking about doing this album, as I was, we were all remanded to our houses, and I'm just like, just coming up with shit on the recording software. I started having this vision about how I wanted the record to start. And I thought that having a big, giant church-sounding choir into that riff, because, anybody that knows who I am or knows what I do, I thought starting with the organ would make them do their, head tilt and go, wait a minute, Mark Dunn's a guitar player, you know what I mean? So, and so it caught everybody off guard, and I just love how I opened my shows with that, the bigger shows. And to me, it's like, it's part of the song, but it's also the intro tape. It's very theatric, and it's just and it sucks too, because that's the one that's the top of my vocal range. So to open with that is really some dumbass on my part, but it is what it is. And so that's only 4 of us singing that choir at Tom Gwaltney's studio, Graphic Sound in Virginia Beach. And Tom Gwaltney was helped engineer this record. And if you watch Discovery Channel any day of the week, you hear Tom's music. He's a sync licensing, music guy. He's just amazing. Really great ear. Anyhow, there's 4 of us. It was me, my girlfriend Chrissy, Jesse Chong, and Sherry Lynn. And we went in there and we just came up. I didn't have a chord stack or anything for him. I'm like, here's the root note, sing that, stack a harmony, I'll come in there somewhere. And we sang it like, 6 or 7 times. And here's the funny thing. Jesse Chong's a dude, and he's the highest note. I mean, he hits this falsetto that I was waiting for the glass to break. It was crazy. So that was a lot of fun. And I think that's a cool opening piece.
So, Jeff and I were listening to that track. We both got our input on it. So it gave me that intro in that chorus gave me a very 80s Yes vibe to it, that John Anderson, Trevor Rabin, Chris Squire type thing. Jeff over here says it gave him that Brian May band type of harmony to it. Any influences from those artists for that track?
Well, I mean, not for that track, but thank you. I if you want to hear something funny, I wanted that organ to be somewhat Rick Wakeman sounding, or even Dirty or Deep Purple. And I wanted, and that organ is the plug-in from the $99 PreSonus software. And I just took it and I smashed it with a limiter and just put some reverb on it, because it kind of sounds a little haunting, And so that's actually the demo, is what I'm telling you, the organ is. As far as the influences, I wanted that kind of Deep Purple or Yes sound, absolutely. I think if you're talking about the Brian May stuff, you're probably talking about some of the intro guitar work. And my only question to that is, how can he not be influenced by one of the greatest ever? That's it's part of our audible DNA. Whenever, you know what I mean, it's there. So anybody that's that present in your upbringing is kind of like lurking around in your subconscious as you play your own guitar and your own stuff, and it's going to come out at some point.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. So, as far as the proggy stuff goes, because that sound gives you that proggy sound of the 70s and part of the 80s. Are influential wise, were you into the prog sound at all, or are you still?
Inadvertently, and that's a great question. I was a sponge, and so while my brothers would be out, I'd see Yes Fragile, and I'd put that on, and I was learning, and I had no idea what the heck I was doing. I was just enthralled with that music. So I didn't understand it, and some of it actually kind of pissed me off, because when you're a kid, you have you hear something that's cool inside of a song, and the rest of it sounds like it's a different language. And so it definitely, Mood for a Day off of Fragile and Roundabout, those in Long Distance Runaround. I was playing those not knowing what in the world I was doing at all. So when that can be inhibiting, right? And so it influenced me, but it also discouraged me at the same time because I was basically a Ferrari without a steering wheel for the longest time. And this is pre-internet, and there's, you don't have resources. You didn't have music theory for dummies, and I wasn't taking guitar lessons from anybody. It was all me dropping the needle and just, figuring it out. So, yeah, but Queen, the first time I ever heard We Will Rock You, I thought that was the coolest guitar tone on the solo that I'd ever heard.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
You've worked as a session artist, hired gun for a chunk of your career. Can you talk a little bit more about your time doing sessions for other artists?
Yeah, you just got to be on time. You got to do what the producer says. You got to, one of the things about session work, especially nowadays, is not a whole lot of sight reading needs to go on, and thank goodness for that. All I can read is, nobody's shoving a sheet of music. It's a number system. And I think the hardest part about that is not injecting yourself into it. Now, what does that mean? One of my favorite guitar players is Michael Landau, and I bet you probably have not heard that name. If you have, good for you. But you hear him play every day, okay? And, in fact, you hear him play every day on the radio or in part of your music collection that you have, I promise you. And I remember him waxing philosophically on this one time where he said, bringing him into the mix, sometimes they want that, and sometimes they just want this particular sound that's a guitar player. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that's the hardest part about it for me. It's also one of the most fun things is like, how can I disguise myself? Because I just inherently do things. We speak the way we speak. You have a Southern drawl. You got to act to not have a Southern drawl. So, I find that challenging. I find, I love a good give and take when the producer just says to me, like, play something crazy and let's just start there. And, if you keep it light and you keep it fun, again, that kind of exudes in the music. And I think that as importantly as my tuning and my rhythm and my chops are, I think conveying the part and playing what I call direct playing is as important as anything else.
Do you find session work to be uninspiring or inspiring? Do you have those days where you're just not inspired to play this style of music as a session guy, or do you find it completely creative?
I did once. I had one day, and where I was getting ready to go on a respite or vacation, or maybe it was on the road for a cool gig or something. And I was just like, antsy, and and every session is a good session. You're playing. What I had to self-check is what I'm getting at in a long-winded way. Sorry, is that I had to look in the mirror in the restroom, go, what are you bitching about? You play music for a living, If you don't want to be on the session, you shouldn't have taken the session. I'm yelling at myself in the mirror. So, I look at each session as an opportunity to find a spark to, accidentally be great. Mm-hmm. I mean, you always want to go in and be great, but you can't. Greatness is almost like butterfly dust. And just to exude my part. And sometimes you get a stiff producer that's, a little Napoleonic. And sometimes you get a producer that's like, man, you're here for your vibe, Mark. Just do what you do, and I'm pretty sure it's going to work. And so all of them wind up being interesting.
Oh, very good.
Well, I mean, with the studio session, do you ever you don't necessarily get all the accolades, or sometimes the studio guys might be overlooked, in the song credits and stuff. How's that work for you?
Well, it depends, and that's a great question, by the way. And like referring to the name Michael Landau, that guy's on literally thousands of songs, but nobody knows his name. And I think, in the ego aisle of the music industry, which is a very wide aisle, it's more wide than the money aisle. But in the ego aisle of the music industry, you really, at some point, if you're going to be in it for the long haul, you have to learn how not to shop on that aisle. Yeah. You just kind of have to give it up, and I'm there for a job. I'm thankful that they like what I do enough to call me in, it's whether or not I like it or whatnot. I'm pretty much getting called for sessions that are real recordings. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Although I will do some demos. I mean, the level of quality of the people that I will be playing with is inherently fun, whether I like the music or not.
Nice.
Very good.
So, as far as the release is concerned, I check my ego. Do I want people to know if I played on a million-selling album? Hell yeah, I do. Is it going to make a difference for me at the end of the day? Probably for another session. So, yeah, I think that part of it is important. But that kind of aspect of it is more inside the industry as opposed to being a household name.
Oh, very good. You touched on this before, but I want to bring it back a little bit. Over the years, you have switched gears into the genre of country music. Now, as a rock artist, was it difficult for you to transition over to the country music realm and then come back to the rock realm? Or did you have any issues going back and forth?
No, I never really left the rock realm. I mean, there was the Georgia Country Music Association. I don't even think it's a thing anymore. The irony is, I won Country Musician of the Year in 2008. And it is one of those things. It's like, that's hilarious. And my friend Rob Tyler is a fiddle player that played with David Allan Coe and then went on to play with Lone Star. He played with me, with the artist I was working with. And I went to him and I'm like, this is absurd. And he goes, Mark, you're the best AM rock guitar player I know. Why shouldn't you win Country Musician of the Year? So, that's the perspective of that. Now, did I have to expand and country stuff was daunting then. The stuff that we hear that's new releases now, I'm not going to drag on anybody, but when you listen to the Alan Jackson stuff, and I mean, there was like Brent Mason's out there just slaying guitar solos that are still very difficult to transcribe. So it was exciting for me to be able to get in there and really have to put my ear to something I had never really done before. And so it was almost like a new chapter of, whoa, this is exciting, I can do it. But I never really left the rock realm. If anything, country made me start listening to more jazz guitar players and saxophone players. And I think that really is where I started to open up even further. But country was definitely the catalyst for that.
Very good.
Yeah. You alluded to Atlanta earlier, and I think I also read you've been in the Nashville scene. Can you compare and contrast the two?
Well, when I moved to Atlanta in '99, and you would go up to Nashville, you could go and jam, like you could get up and play. And then it was not too long after that where Nashville, if you go now and you have somebody that's a friend or something, like, you're basically not sitting in. And my point about that is that it's they may as well put police caution tape up on the stage. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, you've got to be someone for them to relent on a lot of these gigs because they're playing for tips, man, which is crazy. The label that my record is on is called 9 North, and that's a virtual label, meaning it's not a traditional like Sony Records. Yeah. Larry Paregas is the president. Larry was the head of promotion at Sony. His band was Dixie Chicks. And a couple of years ago, we were having lunch in Nashville, and he said that the Chamber of Commerce had calculated that at that point, 900 people a week were moving to Nashville proper.
Wow.
Yeah.
So as far as that scene, of course, I think there's probably more music going on in Nashville. Atlanta became really kind of the mecca for hip-hop on the East Coast, I think. So R&B, hip-hop, a lot of that. Didn't get a ton of sessions for that kind of stuff while I was there. And that's fine. But I think that scene-wise, they were, kind of polar opposites when you think about it. But there's a lot of great history for rock and roll out of Atlanta, and it's still being cultivated on a daily basis. And I think a lot of that's been overshadowed by the success and just overwhelming audience for hip hop, and a lot of that comes out of Atlanta as well. Outkast. I mean, R&B and hip hop artists will record in Atlanta. Whether they're in LA, it's almost like they're just vibing there in that city. So it's that kind of thing. They're stridently different in that way, but they're the same in a lot of ways.
Very good. Wanted to bring this back to Top Gear, and you had touched on it briefly. Produced by 3-time Grammy Award winner Andrew Coleman. Can you just talk about the origins of your relationship with Andrew, and how did this all come together for you guys?
Yeah, it's crazy because Andrew and I, he moved to Virginia Beach in the 90s, and, he graduated Full Sail, and him and his wife, Carrie, were down in Florida. Full Sail's a production school.
Yes.
And so they picked Virginia Beach just kind of somewhat randomly, and there was a studio there called Master Sound, and Rob Ulsh, pretty well-known engineer around the country, had Master Sound at the time. So Andrew went in there, and I don't know if he started as an intern or not, but Andrew landed at Master Sound. And long story long, we never met. So I moved to Atlanta in 99. And by then, Andrew was recording everyone. Like, he's got a Wu-Tang Clan story that's just, it'll have you on the ground if he ever tells it to you. So Wu-Tang, Britney Spears, Justin Timberlake, all of the stuff. And then Pharrell Williams is from Virginia Beach, and he had NERD, and they got to going, and Andrew essentially became Pharrell's engineer. So when I come back from Atlanta back in 2010 or 2011, Andrew was neighbors with my brother, Jimmy, who's the middle brother, who's the DJ, radio DJ.
Mm-hmm.
And he kept telling me I needed to meet him. So my drummer Trip had a studio in Norfolk at the time, and Andrew came down just to check it out, and that's how we met, and got Andrew on a couple of sessions that I was producing for a couple of artists out of Nashville that flew to Norfolk for us to produce them. And then, I'd stay in touch with Andrew. He's a busy guy. And when I realized I was going to do this record for real, I was looking around for a producer, looking around for a studio. And then I called Andrew to see if he would be interested in mixing it. And Andrew said, well, yeah, but who's recording it? And I said, I haven't figured it out yet. And he said, well, I'll do it. And, I was like, oh, okay. How do you not capitalize on that, right?
Yeah.
And so that really was the genesis of our continuing relationship today. And I love Andrew and his family. He's got a great family. And he's so funny because you wouldn't know that this is what he does until you know him. You know what I mean? He's one of the most subdued, vibing, laid-back dudes that I've ever known, much less to be in this industry, much less to have worked with whom he's worked with. And he has verifiable Rock and Roll Hall of Fame level artifacts from some of these sessions that he's done.
Wow.
And yeah, like the legal pad with the lyrics to Drop It Like It's Hot that Snoop wrote contemporaneously when he was getting ready to track. That.
Wow.
So, yeah, he's got some cool stuff. I smile. I don't want to tell his story because he'd be somebody that you guys would just have a fun time interviewing. You should probably get him on your show.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's how that worked. And, man, we hit it off. And, with Tom's studio, we kind of had to have a meeting because that's 3 alphas,
Yeah.
And it's Tom's studio. And Tom's studio is the best drum room I've ever worked in. Like, to me, the drums are the most important part of a record. And if the drums don't sound good, you're screwed. And I don't mean that every record needs to sound like John Bonham.
Yeah.
It's just the drums are the picture frame for the Mona Lisa. Like, if you change the frame of the Mona Lisa sitting in, that painting is going to look different. So if the drums ain't happening, your record ain't happening. And so we did it there. We chose that studio. And I'd say for about 18 months, I tracked every Tuesday and Wednesday because I was out, playing shows and teaching. And every Tuesday and Wednesday for a solid year and a half, we tracked, and we stripped down even the demos, and that's when I say stripped them down, like we deconstructed them again, and that's where Drew started working some of the magic on arrangements and production and stuff like that. Because honestly, guys, I thought I was done. Like when I had like one or two songs that were not quite complete, but I was all proud of my demos I'd done in my home studio, and I'm showing them off. And like next thing I know, I was the little third grade bitch in the corner missing fingers and crying because I didn't know what had just happened to my songs, So, I mean, like Drop D for E stayed pretty close, but and Round stayed pretty close except for like the solo section. But everything else got redone. And let me tell you this real quick. I don't want to pinch you for time. So there's an Easter egg on this album, and it's the last song. And you know what I mean by an Easter egg.
Yes.
Like it's kind of veiled. So you'll find this interesting about me, I think, because it just shows you how all over the map I am. I love Christina Aguilera, and I love her song "Beautiful."
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think that when she's the one, you are beautiful. Yep. I think she sings like an instrument. I think that she has qualities of a horn and gospel runs, and she's just amazing. She's truly a unique singer. Yeah. So I've always wanted to do that song because it's such a well-written song by Linda Perry, who's written some great tunes. She was the singer in Port on Blanc. And it's a well-written tune. It's got a neat chord path, a chord progression. It's an altered scale when you sing it, which all that kind of stuff geeks me out, So I demoed it out. And I demoed it out like the record. I programmed the drums like the record. I even found the right tempo. I mean, you could have married my demo up to hers, and it would have been the same instrumentally, right? So, and then I started getting bummed. I'm like, man, I don't think I can do this, And right before I met with Andrew, Chrissy and I were eating at a restaurant, and a version of "Beautiful" came on the overhead with a saxophone. I'm like, oh God, this is like, I can't do this. It's like terrible. So I gave it to Andrew, who's worked with Christina Aguilera. Yeah. And I said, we can't do this. And he goes, I like your idea though. So he sat on it. And about 3 or 4 days later, I get this email at 4 a.m. Of course I'm awake. He's awake. And he flipped the key. So it's the same intervals, but what was major is minor kind of thing, And it sounded like Tim Burton. Like it sounded like Gotham. And I'm like, wow, this isn't my typical flavor of peanut butter, but I like this. And so we wound up doing the song that's called Not Necessarily Stoned, but ... That's beautiful. So now when you go back and listen to it again. Yeah, it's obviously not the song.
Right.
But it's and the Easter egg is that song title comes from Hendrix and Are You Experienced at the end. He goes, not necessarily stoned, but beautiful. So that's what I did. And John Cuniberti, Satriani's mixer, producer, he's worked with Aerosmith and Red Hot Chili Peppers. He mastered this album and he got the reference, which was kind of cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that was very awesome. And so that's kind of like that's like the real deep dive into some stuff that went on. And we really threw everything at that tune. We threw everything at that tune. And I'll have you know, everything except for the guitar solo is the demo that we did there that I thought was going to be a scratch track.
Oh, so cool.
Yeah.
Yep. And Trip Johnson just played his ever-living ass off on the drums on that. Like, he just... listen to the drums. They're just stupid good,
Very good.
So, yeah.
Very good. All right. So we have one last question for you, and then we'll leave you alone for the evening.
Sure.
Ask this question to all the guests. The mystery of rock and roll is no longer a thing with the dawning of the internet, and especially all the social medias out there. For you, as the artist and the fan of rock and roll, and I guess maybe any music genre, what do you prefer? This new age of accessibility, or do you miss that mystery and mystique of rock and roll?
Both. I'm both. I mean, society has evolved. Look, the first time I met Eddie Van Halen, I was 19 years old, and I was shaking, and I still had posters of him on the walls of my bedroom at my parents' house. And that was unbelievable to me. Now, obviously that was a long time ago, and I couldn't believe I got to meet him. And there's the mystique that we're talking about, right? You don't see the band until the curtain drops and they come out. And that, I like the theatrics. I like the mystery of the rock and roll. But I also like the fact that when I was in LA in May, me and Dave and our respective better halves went to the Baked Potato and saw Michael Landau and Jimmy Johnson, 2 world-class musicians that we could reach out and touch if we wanted to. So that kind of, that settling of it, if you will, by virtue of overexposure, nobody's hidden anymore. And then you got Dave Grohl, who in my opinion is a verifiable rock and roll messiah in the sense that he conveys that he's literally one of us. And he hangs out in the crowd for the opening act. And I think that there's some merit to that. I think that everybody that goes to a show appreciates the mystery. And more importantly, remember, they always say, never meet your heroes, right?
Right.
More importantly, I think with the advent of social media and everybody being a newscaster, a de facto Twitter newscaster, if you want to be nowadays with smartphones, I think that rock stars are more of a rock star these days by just being a normal person.
Exactly.
And you know what I mean?
Exactly.
So, and rule number 1 in this business is do not be an asshole. And I will hire a not as good drummer I'm not dissing Trip or anything, I'm just saying in general. I would hire a not as good drummer that was just a sweet person and got along with everybody, as opposed to the monster drummer that is a complete douche canoe. You know what I'm saying? So you got to be cool in this industry. You just got to be sweet.
Oh, very good. We're out of our allotted time for the evening. Is there anything that we left off tonight that you would like to plug or promote?
Well, Top Gear, markdunnguitar.com. It's on all the platforms, and look for it as Mark Dunn Top Gear. And there's the video at markdunnguitar.com. You can listen to the album there, and you can also download it if you want. You can buy CDs. We're shipping CDs in case anybody needs drink coasters. And stay tuned to you guys, because I'm sure you might throw some updates as far as mine and Dave's music is concerned. And when that album gets done, maybe we'll be back on the show and you guys can play some stuff and review some of the tunes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, this is how things are going to work out. We're about 3 weeks behind on our episodes, but when this thing is ready to go, Jeff, the editing wizard over here, will get it all cleaned up and we'll send it to you. And please share it to wherever you can, because we will.
Yeah, well, I'm going to create an event for it on my Facebook or something like that. So when it's coming time for you guys to put it out, I'm going to be like, everybody go here.
Fantastic. Yeah. Mark, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been fun.
No, my pleasure. Thanks for letting me blabber about myself. I appreciate the interest, and I hope you guys enjoyed the record. And I'll talk to you sooner than later. I can't wait for you to hear the stuff with Dave.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
My pleasure. I'll see you guys soon.
All right, man. Take care.
never take from you, then you plug out